Let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the session. So we're going to be talking about automation, integration, and orchestration for better engineering ops. So myself, I'm Ranchana Rajasekaran, Senior SDET and Postman. I'll let Ivan introduce himself.
Yeah, so I'm Evan Lindsey. I'm a lead software development engineer in test at Postman. So if you ever hear SDET said, that's the abbreviated version of what it stands for. But yeah, we work together on Postman's quality engineering team.
Yeah. Today we'll be talking about some common features of Postman like collections, monitors, and how do we configure them. But also we are going to be talking about some advanced features. Evan, you want to talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's definitely a starting point, really for a lot of people. And making use of Postman is, one second here. All right, minor technical difficulties. I hit my headphone cord. Can you hear me, Ranchana?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so collections and monitors are a way to integrate your requests in a combined space with the collection, and then we'll talk a little more about monitors. But yeah, as far as being able to use those in different environments outside of Postman itself, there are different approaches to doing that. So one way that we propose we're going to show you today.
Okay. Over to leveraging monitors and collections and monitors. We know what a collection is. A collection houses relevant APIs, API requests along with its test. So what a monitor does is monitor lets you run the request periodically to check the performance as well as the response to these tests. We can also access the monitor from web as well as the native app. The monitors that we have has an amazing reporting, and it also shows you the historical data. So it is like pretty easy to compare all the data, like, every single run. Over to demo. I'll be showing you how to create an API key for a collection, how to create and configure a monitor. And so we need the collection ID and the monitor ID to run it programmatically. So I'll be also showing you how to do that. Or for this particular session, we are using Postman Echo Collection. This can be found in the public workspace called Publish Postman Templates. So one way to fork a collection is click on the fork button here. And we can give a label that we want. We can also choose which workspace we want it to reflect in. It's just taking a minute. Yeah. So we have a collection here. You can also see the fork label. So this is the collection ID. Everything after the collection and the black flash, this is the collection ID will be to invoke via Newman. And also we will be needing the API key if it is not a publicly available collection. I'll also show you how to create the API key. So our API key, you have to go to the profile settings of your Postman page, and there is an option called Postman API keys. And then we can just click on generate API key, and we can just give a name. I'll say API key Galaxy. Has it's been noted here that it is a one, you can just see it one time, unencrypted. Next time you see it's going to be encrypted, so it's best to copy it and save it in your clipboard somewhere. So this is with the collection. So these are the two things you're going to be needing to invoke Newman, collections via Newman. And let's go ahead and create a monitor to run this collection via monitor. So we have to click on the monitor tab, create new monitor, give a new name. I'm going to give it Galaxy Postman, and we want to use this existing collection. If we have different versions, we can choose a version. If we have an environment, we can just go wide with some environment, run it against some environment variables. Right now, I'm just leaving it blank. And we also have the ability to choose the monitor run, how frequently we want the run to be. So right now I'm just leaving it every day, and also we can choose the region in which we want the monitor to run. Right now I'm just leaving it as is. And yeah, create. So we can see the monitor being created here. So this is the monitor name. There's a tilde and everything after the tilde. This is the monitor ID. So in the code that we are going to be demoing now, so we are using the monitor ID, the collection ID, as well as the API key as environment variables. So we'll be storing it in the Circle CI. Yeah. So that's pretty much about how do you create a monitor and how do you fetch the ID, the unique IDs of the monitor and the collections that we have just created. And to talk about Newman, we know Newman is a command line utility for execution of collections. We also can use Newman as a JavaScript library, so it is very easy to integrate with our CI/CD pipeline and validate our test scripts, and it can block a build or whatever. And if we have the collection ID and the API key, if it's a private repo, as mentioned earlier, we don't have to go through the hassle of exporting the collection JSON or the environment JSON. So the Newman is going to be pulling up the collections directly from the Postman API. So we can also integrate Newman with multiple reporting formats like JUnit, HTML extra, etc. So it just gives you a very good visually looking report with a lot of details. And over to Evan.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll share my screen. That is my cue. Give me a second here. Alrighty. All right. You got my screen now, Ranchana? Perfect.
Yeah.
So let's pick up where you left off. So Ranchana was talking about Newman. And yeah, so people who are familiar with the collection runner within Postman, which we didn't demo. So a quick recap would actually be if you were in the Postman collection and you had something like Postman Echo, you could come into the main overview tab, click on run, and that's going to set you up to select your target requests, how many iterations you'd like to go through, different issues on delays between the requests, what environment are we going to be using, a lot of configuration. And from here, we can just run it directly in the Postman UI. Right now, I'm using the desktop version, but this is identically shown in the web interface, aka Artemis at this point. So that would be a really common way to go about running the collection. However, with Newman and using it as a JavaScript library, we're able to integrate it into actual JavaScript code or existing test scripts. This is also true of monitors and the monitor API. So once again, if we go back to the monitor itself, you can see that, and we'll actually be showing this output at the end, a monitor would be ran on its schedule, or you can automatically invoke it through the run button, similar to the collection run. But if you didn't want to have to go through the interface to invoke it or wait on that schedule, once again, you can make use of the monitor API available through Postman using your monitor ID, using your API key. And at that point, invoke it and get the feedback of your requests, the response details in the response packet itself that's returned. So yeah, we're going to run through how we can actually do that in JavaScript code. Some of the advantages to this would be, as I had said, making these health checks a part of your actual build cycle. So if you're already building an application and you have a testing process, you can integrate these into your testing process, run these programmatically. And then what that's going to do is allow you to potentially stop deployments that fail validations or fail a certain tolerance of validations. Maybe you want to allow a certain amount of fails. But rather than waiting for your build cycle to complete, push your API out, and then wait for a monitor to be run or wait for you to manually invoke your collection, perhaps it's better that you actually run those checks ahead of time against the code that's being deployed, or at least immediately post-deployment, and ensure that you pass those checks. So we'll go on to demo number 2, which is me, and we'll run through some of that test code. So I'll actually share, Ranchana actually just shared the link to the repository in GitHub that we created for this demonstration. So it's going to be called Aobeo, which is Automation, Integration, and Orchestration for Better Engineering Operations, which we came up with the title before we came up with the content, but I think it touches nicely on what we're doing. As far as the actual test runner that we're going to be using, this repository harnesses Mocha to be able to execute the collections. In case you didn't get a chance to see Ranchana's setup of the needed components, aka a monitor and a collection, and getting your API key, we have those resources available in the repository right here, so you can get a refresher on what it is to do that, why you would do it, and how to do that, and also screenshots of where to retrieve those IDs. The IDs needed are easy. It's easiest to retrieve them from the URL itself, and they'll be in these places as Ranchana had demonstrated. In this demonstration, what we're going to be doing is setting those values as environment variables. And really for now, we just need those 3. And then if you actually pull the code down, so we've got our code pulled right here in my local VS Code instance. So in line with how you would normally work with a JavaScript project, just going to run npm install. Locally, if you're running on a Unix style environment, you can use the export statement to export these 3 needed API or 3 needed keys as environment variables so that you could run it locally. So you would need your own API key, collection ID, and monitor ID. And then the npm test command is going to execute the 2 main tests that we have in place here, which are the monitor spec and the Newman spec. And essentially, we've lined up each of these to run almost identically in how they are read through Mocha. The actions are just a little bit different. So within Newman, and if you're familiar with Mocha, we have the BDD style interface, which is we're going to describe the test, and for each it block, it represents a test, and then we can perform assertions or expect statements, depending on your assertion library, directly in the code. So for each of these, we're going to ensure that we can run the collection successfully, and then it's going to fail 0 requests, it's going to fail 0 assertions. In the case of Newman, and we can return to the repo for that. In the case of Newman, what's most important for the demo purposes are that we are wrapping the Newman JavaScript library call to invoke the collection directly, pulling it from the API using our ID and key. We're invoking that, and then we're listening for the callbacks such as done, and then we're wrapping that in a promise. So within Mocha, if we were to invoke this action of the Newman collection run, but not await it to complete, we would immediately jump to the additional it blocks. But what's important here is that we actually wrap it as a promise. We're able to await the execution to complete, and then we can resolve the data about the run and return that to the variable that was awaiting it. And then from there, use that variable to perform assertions. And then in the monitor, we're not using Newman. We don't have to promisify anything because we're using Axios to make the post request. So Axios is a really common HTTP library in JavaScript. People may have preferences as far as what library they'd want to use. For the demo, we're using Axios. And once again, it's already asynchronous, so we're just going to await the response. We don't need to post any particular body, but the URL is going to be the monitor API with the ID and the key. And then once we have a response, and we'll return to the repo for this, what we can do is format and log that response. So anyone familiar with Newman knows that it's going to give you some really nice command line output as it's executing. However, with any HTTP request, the eventual output on the console is going to be based on how you format it. So we get the response, and then this is just a little script or just a little block of code that I came up with that takes that response data, iterates over the executions that were completed, and then takes information about the request and the response, and essentially formats it in a way that we're used to seeing in Newman. So it's two approaches to essentially the same test run. One harnessing the collection and keeping the execution local, one calling the API to have the monitor run in the cloud, but still using that response data to assert upon. So we have essentially the same assertions in both the monitor spec and the Newman spec. So that's a quick rundown of the code. Once again, if you have access to the repository, you can dive a little bit deeper. The code snippets here are just at a high level. We're doing a little bit more in the repository itself. And then within Circle CI, this is where it gets fun. So we've created the monitor based on the collection. We've got the keys we needed. We've got some sweet code written. But where do we execute this code? Well, as far as the repository itself, this is just it's just test components. But a lot of time your test components, whether it be unit testing level or whether it be like integration and API tests, they do live in the same repository as your application code. And then you would be able to essentially make use of these components alongside of your application code and then have a test step in your build cycle. For our configuration, what we're going to do is just have a test step in our build cycle. So we'll get through this part pretty quick because we don't have a lot of time today. But within Circle CI, I've added some documentation as far as setting the environment variables and creating your own workflow configuration. If we were to go into Circle CI, to start with the environment variables, we could come in here, go to environment variables. You see we have API key, collection ID, and monitor ID. It's really easy to add a new one. It's going to mask it by default. So we get out of there and go back. So essentially everything you're seeing here are runs that were completed on push. So whenever I committed and pushed to my GitHub repository, Circle CI is connected directly to the repository, recognizes that, and runs the build cycle based on that. Now, the configuration I have for this build cycle, as stated, is essentially just a test step. So there's a basic Circle CI configuration that lives directly in the repo, and we've got the path right here. We're calling on the node orb, which it's not node 4.1, it's orb version 4.1. We're actually specifying that we're using node 14.15, which I believe is the latest LTS. And then the steps, we're going to check out the code, install the packages, we're going to execute it, and then we're going to store a couple of different results, one being the JUnit results from Mocha, and two being the HTML results from Newman. So with that configuration in place and with my code pushed, you can see the last execution was ran about an hour ago. So you can come in here, see that it was a success, but then we'll look at the workflow. And if we go into test, basically everything I just stated is done. And what matters is this npm test command. So the npm command harnesses Mocha to perform the testing based on where we have the files placed in our repository. And right here, we've started the monitor. And boom, these are all the requests from the Postman Echo collection. We get data about it. We get that log to our output. And look at that. We performed 35 requests within the monitor, 86 assertions, and then the 3 assertions that Mocha made are that it ran successfully and we failed nothing. And then we immediately jump over to Newman. It's going to run these in order. So it starts with the monitor test, goes down to Newman, and then you can see the output's very similar. But this is the default output from Newman. And then at the end, we get a little bit of output in a nice table format. Same assertions, boom, 6 passing. So from there, we can look in our test tabs and see that, okay, the Mocha test library has not failed any assertions. It didn't throw a failed step into our build pipeline, so it didn't show up. Right here, we staged a fail. So essentially this is what it would look like if it were to fail a step or if it weren't to complete a testing action in the given time frame that we had set within the Mocha settings. And then, yeah, so that's reporting at a basic level. We're at 20 minutes, so we've got just enough time that I'm going to toss it back to Ranchana, and she's going to show you how reporting can come at an even more valuable level, because knowing that your build passed is great, but if it didn't, we would want to be able to dive into why it didn't pass. So Ranchana, back over to you.
Sure.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks,
How do I kill this? Are you able to take over, Ranchana?
Let me try.
Stop sharing. There we go. It's all yours.
Okay. Okay. So we can see the library that we are using, as Evan mentioned, is the HTML extra Newman reporting, and the result after every run, the result is being uploaded to the artifacts. Click on that. Yeah. So this report was built by Danny from quality team at Postman. This report is like HTML report is like super brilliant, and it is very detail oriented. We can see the number of iterations it's been run and the total number of assertions for every collection that has been run. And you can also deep dive into every single request. Like, let me open one of the requests. You can see the request description, the information, the time that is taken for the request to run, for the response, and the response code, and the headers, the value, the params, and the response body. It is super detail oriented. And in case of any failure or something goes wrong, it is very easy to dig in with the use of reporter. So this is what we are using for Newman. And for monitors, with every single monitor run, there is going to be a result reflected on the monitor dashboard. So this was the last run. If you click on any particular run, we can see the results here, populated here on the dashboard itself. There's one more way of finding differentiating between a manual trigger, that is basically an ad hoc trigger which is done programmatically, or like, we just click it manually or trigger via the API, or if it's a scheduled run. So there's a label that kind of differentiates between that. And having this historical data is very much useful for comparison and for any reference. So this is the monitor dashboard that we have. That's pretty much it from the demo. So over to Q&A. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, so we can go ahead and kick off Q&A. So we titled the slide "Recap and Q&A." So yeah, I think the takeaway is how you approach this is really personal preference. There is no end-all be-all solution to how your testing should work, but there are a lot of options. I think Postman has amazing advantages as far as being able to use the UI on both the web and the app, but there's just a lot of questions that come along as far as, I've already got a very script-based approach to my testing, so how can I integrate incrementally or entirely the work that we're doing into Postman into our DevOps, more or less. So these are two approaches, whether you harness the monitor or whether you want to use Newman. Once again, it's based on if you're already harnessing monitors. It isn't necessary that you set one up to use this approach. It's more about utilizing what you have. So if you just have a collection and you want to see it done in your build cycle and you're using JavaScript, this is a great approach. If you're not using JavaScript, potentially use Newman on the CLI. There was another talk, I believe, given today by Kevin that's going to cover using Newman on the CLI within Jenkins as opposed to Circle CI. But continuous integration is a vital component to anyone's build cycles or DevOps as a whole. So yeah, I think that about covers it. Ranchana, did you have any sign-offs on that?
No, I feel it's very powerful to use Newman or monitors programmatically to invoke anything related to collection, because it gives us a lot of power on what we want to do it and where do you want to assert it on and where do you want to keep the build checks on. I feel it's very powerful. And then
as far as questions, did we, Francisco, did we have any posted immediately? I see some in the chat. I see that they had asked me to zoom in on the code. I apologize about that. But Ranchana did post the link. So if you want to see it up close, everything I covered, even in my editor, is currently in the GitHub repository.
Yeah, great job, guys. I do see on Slido we've got a lot of great questions in there, and then we're going to jump in, and we've got some time to go through some of these. So I don't know which one y'all want to start with, but yeah, if one start to the start of the top line.
Yeah, I'm on the Slido tab now. Ranchana, we can just take turns on these. So I had actually inserted a bullet point on one of the slides that it would be a bonus if I could cover parallel testing today. We just don't have enough time. If you go to the repository, there is a separate folder called Test Parallel. And I've actually abstracted the Newman commands that I was demonstrating to a central utilities class. So for each test spec file, what we're doing is we're only passing the collection ID off to that utilities file. Mocha has the ability to run parallel testing built in. However, it's not dynamic at runtime. It looks at the number of test files that you have in place. So a really easy approach to running your collections in parallel would be to create multiple spec files, insert the target collection ID in that spec file, pass it off to utilities class so you're not writing the same code over and over. And then if you enable the parallel flag on Mocha, it will run as many threads as possible, whether you dictate the max instances or it's just looking at the CPU power of your machine, and it will run those collections in parallel. And then how those collections run is based on what you've built. So absolutely, there's a way to do it. So please go to the repository and dive a little deeper if you want to learn about that.
Awesome.
Yeah, and also there's this question about using monitors to run the collection versus invoking via Newman, which is whether is it considered it as a bad practice, like using via monitor.
So microservice.
Where did it go? I lost it now.
It may have kicked over to polls. It's down at the bottom. Would it be considered bad practice to use Postman API to queue a monitor run via your pipeline instead of using Newman?
I feel it's not a bad practice. It depends on the requirement. If you want to see the results on a monitor dashboard, monitor is the best way to go by it. But if you don't want to keep comparing results and it's just on one particular build cycle, Newman is also a way to go by it. Like, when you want to add something.
Yeah, I don't think either would be considered bad practice. I think it's just your use case. A lot of people really like to have that continual coverage, and it's not uncommon to have both scheduled runs and triggered runs. So this is making use of your existing collection and monitor, and making use of allowing it to run scheduled and invoking it, and not having to go the route of using Newman. Of which is, in this case, a JavaScript library. Another advantage we didn't cover to using the monitor API is every programming language is going to have some sort of request library. So this is actually a good question for that reason, because if you're in a language like, say, Java, and you want to use Newman programmatically, not as a command line utility, but you can't use it as a JavaScript library, the monitor would be a great option because you could invoke that API using Java's whatever request library, Rest Assured or something. And then you could use that API. And no, I don't think it would be considered bad practice at all.
Now, I don't know if it'll kick us out, but I think we can keep going. I think Melanie brought up a great point on the chat. I don't know if you guys want to touch on that, or maybe any tips to that effect of API keys that an individual contributor might create, and how to deal with that after offboarding or something.
Yeah, if someone on the team creates the API key, they leave the company, need to be created by someone on a team. Yeah, no, it's absolutely true, because Ranchana, what she demonstrated was in her own personal settings, creating that API key. Haven't gone much further into what it would look like to have team API keys and whether that's on our roadmap. So it's a great question and a great point. I don't have an immediate answer on how to get around that, because the approach we've been using would be to use a key user of your team, have them make a key user make a key, and then have that be the API key. So something to consider. Wish I had more for you right there.
Yeah, well, I think we're just at the end of the talk, people. So I know there's a lot more stuff. I think we might even have a little bit of a break. I know I do, but Again, thanks everybody for hopping in. I think what we'll do is maybe take some of these questions. I don't know if we're going to answer them later, if they'll be available later. I think we can find out. But yeah, give them a high five if you enjoyed it. And again, thanks so much. I'm going to hop off. I don't know, again, if this stays open and if you guys want to go through any more of those questions really quickly.
Yeah, unless it kicks us out, we've got about 3 more questions I'm looking through. So I don't mind sticking around for a minute to cover them. Ranchana, is that all right with you?
Yeah.
All right, good luck, guys.
Thanks, Francisco.
Thank you.
So a couple of these. The second question down from Trevor Ranchana is about microservice architecture and isolating tests to avoid flaky tests. Is that something you want to address?
You go ahead. I'm just reading the second question. I'm having trouble with API. That is. Even you can,
okay,
you can
yeah,
go ahead
no
with that.
Oh, you're in further down. Yeah. Trying to share the love between us. Yeah. So for microservice architecture, I can tell you what we're doing. So we have a microservice architecture at Postman, and essentially the practice that we're following is we are testing those microservices in isolation. We don't have a master test collection that runs against all of the APIs, though there are potentially some services that integrate with each other. So if you're creating a collection for a particular microservice for the sake of documentation, or just have, be able to run each request independently, those types of collections are good to isolate to the microservice. But as you create your testing collection, especially when you're running it using a collection runner or any of these approaches, it needs to be able to go from top to bottom without encountering an error. I was actually covering this with a friend yesterday who I actually saw was in the chat. So shout out to Brad and Bobby for watching this and making me think about this yesterday. If you're trying to run your testing collection from top to bottom, there may be integration with other services that are necessary for the current service that you're trying to focus your testing on. So essentially lining up your requests where they take place in an order such as authentication, creation of entity 1 that is a needed entity in the hierarchy of whatever your testing flow is for entity number 2. So entity 2 maybe relies on entity 1 to exist. So authentication, entity 1, entity 2. It needs to occur in an order that these things can play off of each other. And the good news is that you can share variables between each request using an environment and using test scripts, both pre and post. So best practices for isolation are to try and keep it isolated. But if it does somehow interact with another mandatory service, just be able to identify your documentation collections versus the collections you're actually using for a test flow and ensure they can run without issue. I think that sort of answers that.
Yeah. And we have a question from Adam. I'm having trouble with an API that is being slow. Does Postman have a way to retry request after null data has been returned? So I think we can add a test script, post test script, and so we can assert on the response, like saying if no data is being returned or something, we can retry. We can add it programmatically in the post script. But do we have anything else? Any other way
it would have to be done. To my knowledge, it would have to be done programmatically. I don't think there's a built-in retry setting. A lot of that's based on the API you are testing. Of course, some APIs have hard timeouts set. Some will wait infinitely. So actually, the fact that they time out is based on how you're testing it. A good point would be in this Mocha code, we have the limit set to 1.5 minutes. That's really long for a Mocha test, but not for a collection. So I set it pretty high so that it could wait on the collection to return a response. So, depending on where the timeout comes from, whether it's that you timed out waiting on it or it timed itself out in returning a response, I think it would have to be done programmatically. However, if you have an API that's timing out and within itself and returning a null response, you've caught the bug, right? You've caught the bug. So you need to work with the developers to ensure that that's resolved, because that's not going to be a good user experience.
Yeah, timeouts. Yeah, they're never good experience. Are monitors similar to tool like App Dynamics? So I was just reading about what an
I'm not
App
sure.
Dynamics
I don't
is.
use App Dynamics.
Yeah, even me. I was just reading about it. So I'm not too sure to give an answer about that. So what are monitors for us? To put it simply, what a monitor does is like we can schedule the collection run at the time that we want. Like we can just give any particular schedule that we want, and we can also select which region we want it to be run. And also with monitor, there is amazing integration with messaging services like Slack or anything, wherein whenever there's a timely run of your contract test or any test that you want to be run, and then you get the feedback immediately. So that is also another use of monitors.
Great.
Not sure about app dynamics too.
I wouldn't. I try not to speak to things I'm not as familiar with. Doug Murphy says he loves your glasses, Ranchana. I think we all do.
Oh. Thank you.
I think that pretty much covers it. Everybody's just saying thank you at this point. There were a couple questions in chat we covered. There were questions in Slido. Opening that back up, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have one new question. We'll hit that and we'll go ahead and sign off. So I have a problem with a web server times out in 30 seconds, but response takes over 30 seconds to come back. What do we have to do? Retry programmatically. Yeah, I think that's in line with everything we were just talking about. You know, that as far as, the server itself times out in 30 seconds, but the response takes over 30 seconds to come back. Yeah, I mean, that sounds like an internal issue, and that if you know for a fact it needs to take over 30 seconds to execute, then you would just need to adjust your settings internally. Yeah, retries would have to be done programmatically at this point that I'm aware of.
Yeah. That's it.
Cool.
Anything more? Do you have anything in chat?
No, and like I said, we may be hogging the room. They didn't tell us that we could stay on this long, so we better hop off.
I can see a comment from Trent saying recordings will be shared later. Okay, well, they're not kicking us out yet. Okay.
Okay. Trent said there will be a recording?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. All right, cool.
Okay.
Yeah, well, thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you.
We really
everyone.
appreciate it. Thank you, Ranchana, for working with me on this. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, thanks, Evan. Always a pleasure to work with you.
But I guess we're going to go back to our regular jobs and start testing some stuff. So we'll see everybody later. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.